July 2nd, 2008. Early in the morning, the sun has barely risen over the small city of Rio Brilhante in Brazil. The streets are still empty, save for a few early risers starting their day. One such early riser walks along a narrow road in the city centre when he glances into a nearby vacant lot and sees something strange among scattered rubbish and weeds. Lying motionless in the dirt is the body of a man. His arms are stretched out wide, his legs crossed neatly at the ankles. The shape is unmistakable, a crucifixion. Shirtless, the letters INRI have been crudely carved into the man's flesh, just above his sternum, a Latin acronym meaning Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Whatever had happened here, it clearly wasn't random. This wasn't some street robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. Police arrive quickly at the scene as a crowd begins to gather, including journalists from the town's local newspapers and TV stations. Because in a city of less than 40,000 people, this sort of thing just didn't happen. It doesn't take long for the body to be identified as 33-year-old bricklayer Catalino Gardina. Examining his body, police determined that he had been suffocated with a plastic bag and stabbed once in the heart with a knife, possibly the same one used to carve the letters into his chest. The deliberate staging of the body makes it clear that this is not a typical murder scene. It feels ritualistic, sacrificial even. But beyond these disturbing signs, there's little forensic evidence at the scene. There's no obvious murder weapon that's been left, no fingerprints are found, no clear footprints are discovered, and they can't even determine if Catalino was killed there or brought there afterwards by his killer. All they can say for certain is that his killer had very purposefully and very deliberately posed his body in the shape of a cross. But whether it was intended to mean something religious, something ritualistic, or something else entirely is unclear. So police begin canvassing the area, as well as Catalino's neighbours, looking for anyone who might have heard or seen something suspicious the night before. But nobody had. As they dig into Catalino's background, they find little that could point to a motive. He was a quiet man, described as humble by his friends and family. He was openly gay, and he was said to have struggled with alcoholism and even drug abuse in the past. And while nobody knows it at the time, these particular traits would be vital to understanding why he was attacked and what had happened to him that night. So with no leads at all, and no answers from the police, the media begins to fill the vacuum with speculation. While some newspapers and TV reports feature concerned locals describing how they're too afraid to leave their homes after dark, others begin to speculate about the meaning behind the symbolic pose in writing, hinting at the possibility of something darker at work. A religious fanatic, a satanic cult, or even something supernatural. And with every headline, the fear and panic in the small city only intensifies. While the police try to downplay it to keep the public calm, even they begin to suspect that this is not going to be an isolated incident. It feels purposeful to them, the work of somebody extremely disturbed, and they can't help but wonder if Catalino's murder might just be the start of something, rather than the end. And they were right, at least about that aspect, because Catalino was the first victim of a ritualistic serial killer, and it wouldn't be long before more bodies would be found in the quiet city of Rio Brilhante, each carefully positioned in the shape of a cross. And yet, even as panic spread and rumours of a serial killer took hold, no one could have imagined the truth. That behind it all was a 16-year-old boy. Driven by a twisted sense of morality, determined to purify the town by hunting those he deemed immoral, he would soon come to be known as Maníaco da Cruz, or in English, the Cross Maniac. Before we carry on with the video, I just wanted to flag up front that this case has received little attention outside of Brazil, and as a result, many of the sources used to write this script have been translated into English, which could lead to some details being incorrect or lost in translation. I've done my best to verify everything, but it just feels inevitable in these sorts of scenarios that I'll make some mistakes. I just thought it was worth saying before we jump back into the case. The following month, on August 24th, a second body was found in Rio Brilhante. This time, a woman was discovered lying on her back on top of a grave in the São Cristóvão cemetery. Just like Catalino, her arms were fully extended to either side, with her palms facing upwards and her legs crossed at the ankles, making the recognizable crucifixion pose. She was completely naked, and her neck bore clear signs of pressure, bruising, redness, and swelling, indicating she had likely been strangled. She was quickly identified as 22-year-old Leticia Neves de Oliveira, a gas station attendant who had failed to return home after finishing her shift the previous evening. Tragically, her family had reported her missing just hours before her body was discovered. Just like with Catalino's crime scene, the investigators found no signs indicating a struggle had occurred in the area. So this meant that not only had her body been placed there with caution, but that her killer had been extremely careful and precise when arranging her limbs into the cross pose. Leticia didn't even appear to have any defensive wounds visible, leading them to suspect she was either taken by surprise or had been unconscious when she was killed. There was nothing carved into her skin, like there had been with Catalino, though several sources claim a small cross necklace was placed around her neck, but I couldn't verify that detail. Despite being found naked, tests showed no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. Her friends and co-workers told the police she had no known enemies. She was quiet and hardworking, lived with her family, and had no criminal record. Unlike Catalino, she didn't use drugs, and she wasn't a heavy drinker, and as far as they could tell, she had no other connection with him. But they knew there had to be a reason the killer had chosen these two individuals. Nobody would create such carefully staged scenes using random victims. Would they? Interestingly, they did discover that Leticia was also gay. Given the religious symbolism, this led to speculation that, perhaps rather than a cult or satanic motive as initially theorized, their suspect could be motivated by religion, murdering those he saw as morally flawed and sinful. Even though the locals immediately linked the two cases for obvious reasons, the police refused to publicly confirm any connection between them, wanting to prevent mass panic. Despite their attempts to maintain calm and order, with this second victim found posed in the shape of a cross, it wasn't just local news who began covering the case, it became a national story. And as mass panic and fear overtook Brazil, that's when the nickname began to take hold, the Maniac of the Cross. People were so afraid that nighttime curfews were followed by just about everyone in the city, despite not being legally enforced. Local downtown shops were reported to be practically empty after dark, and that was if they stayed open at all. Some schools even shortened their hours so kids could get home earlier, especially after a large number of parents began refusing to let their children walk home alone, regardless of the time of day. Some local religious leaders also began using the cases as fuel for their sermons, preaching about morality and punishment, further fanning the flames of paranoia in the largely religious community, whether intentionally or not. And then a third body was found, and this time the victim was a child. On October 3rd, 13-year-old Gleice Kelly da Silva left her school and never made it home. She was last seen walking alone in a quiet residential area of Rio Brilhante, wearing her school uniform and carrying a small shoulder bag. By the evening, with no sign of her, her family reported her missing to the police. Their friends and neighbours helped search for her, combing the streets, knocking on doors, and calling out her name. Because of the two recent murders, everyone feared the worst, but no one wanted to believe it could happen again, not to a child. But tragically, 2 days later, their worst fears were confirmed. In an unfinished, half-abandoned construction site on the outskirts of town, Gleice's body was discovered. She was lying on her back, stretched out across a slab of concrete surrounded by broken beams and discarded bricks. Once again, she had been posed like a cross, with her arms extended fully to either side and her legs crossed precisely at the ankles. But this time, the killer had left something else at the scene, a message. Beside her body, police discovered a handwritten note, which reportedly read, "Corpse of Thor" in English, alongside the phrase, "Until next hell," or potentially, "Until next winter." Strangely, almost every article or source I looked at had a different explanation of the contents of this note, some featuring completely new elements, and others featuring differing combinations. For example, some accounts claim the note was covered in hand-drawn crosses and random letters that seemed to spell out the word hell in places. So while I can confirm there was a note, its exact contents are a little unclear. Like the first two victims, Gleice's cause of death was found to be asphyxiation, likely by strangulation. Once again, there was no sign of sexual assault, she had no defensive wounds on her body, and the crime scene offered no real forensic evidence. And like the other two cases, there were no witnesses, and there was no surveillance footage. It now seemed glaringly obvious that the killer was selecting his crime scenes carefully. They were all quiet, open-air locations, with few natural observers. Any attempts to suppress rumours of a serial killer or satanic cult now fell on deaf ears. The story had already put fear into the hearts of the nation, especially the residents of Rio Brilhante. But with the third victim being a 13-year-old child, this was ramped up to 11. Rumours about satanic rituals, religious fanatics, and supernatural curses spread like wildfire. Residents gathered in churches to pray, light candles, and plead for protection. With mounting pressure to find the killer, a special task force was formed to handle the case, pulling in resources from Campo Grande and other nearby jurisdictions. While the authorities had thought they might be onto something with their theory that the killer was a religious fanatic of some kind, punishing those he judged as morally lacking, they struggled to understand how 13-year-old Gleiss could fit into this pattern. The only connection between the first two victims was that they were both gay, so they had speculated, given the religious imagery, that the killer was targeting and punishing people he believed were sinful. But this idea seemed to fall apart with the murder of Gleiss. Whatever the motive, the Cross Maniac had made his boldest move yet, and by taking the life of a child, he had confirmed what many in Rio Brilhante had feared from the beginning. This wasn't a spree, it wasn't impulsive, it was purposeful, ritualistic, and likely going to keep happening until the person responsible was stopped. When police finally admitted that the three cases were connected and that they were hunting a serial killer, something unexpected happened. A witness came forward. A 17-year-old girl known only as Carla walked into a police station and told them that something terrifying had happened to her around a week before Gleiss was murdered. She told them she had gone to a concert in town that night. Afterwards, she was waiting near a phone booth for a relative to pick her up when a man in a hoodie approached her. Although he initially didn't say anything, he suddenly pulled out a knife and pressed it against her stomach. He then ordered her to walk with him, leading her to an abandoned building on the edge of town, and once alone, he began to interrogate her. He asked her if she believed in God, if she was a virgin, if she liked men or women, how many boyfriends she'd had, and then, perhaps most chillingly, he asked her if she thought someone could ever love him. She replied carefully and kindly, trying not to provoke him. He then told her, "I went out tonight to kill a whore, and found you instead." And then he let her go, but not before warning her that if she told anyone about what happened, he would come back to kill not only her, but her entire family too. But after seeing a 13-year-old girl had been the next victim, she felt she had no choice but to come forward, in case her attacker was the serial killer they were hunting, and her account could somehow help catch him. However, she never actually saw the man's face, at least not clearly. It was too dark and he never removed his hood, so all she could say for certain was that he sounded like he was a teenager, likely somewhere between 17 and 20. So even though her account perhaps helped them understand how the Cross Maniac was selecting his victims, judging them based on their answers to his questions, it didn't bring them any closer to identifying who he was. Friends, family and neighbours of Gleiss posted tributes online, many of them on Orkut, a social media site popular in Brazil at the time. On Orkut, users had what was called a scrapbook, a sort of public wall similar to a Facebook wall back then, where other people could leave public messages referred to as scraps. The task force monitored all the activity on Gleiss's page, hoping to spot something unusual or suspicious, and that's when they saw a strange message posted beneath one of the tributes on her scrapbook. Written in all capitals, it read, "Dead people don't get scraps, you sickos." The comment was clearly mocking the act of leaving tributes on the dead child's page, and while it could have been the cruel act of some internet troll, it wasn't. The message had been made by a user calling themselves DogHell666. The Orkut profile featured images of disturbing drawings, alongside a teenager dressed all in black, with dark eyeliner and painted nails. In a large portion of the photos, he was posing among various gravestones in the dark. The user had joined a range of troubling groups with names such as I Love Corpses and I'm a Satanist. But in reality, he in no way resembled the profile they had for their killer, who they believed to be experienced, precise, and methodical, not an attention-seeking kid. But when the records from Gleiss's phone came back, they revealed she had missed around a dozen calls right after her estimated time of death. And although the number was not directly tied to anyone, the exact same number was publicly listed in the bio of the Dog Hell profile as belonging to them. Whoever owned that page, whoever the teenage boy in the pictures was now seen as their prime suspect. And it didn't take long for the task force to trace the page's owner to a 16-year-old boy who not only lived in Rio Brilhante, but he was actually the neighbour of the first victim, Catalino Gardena. In fact, they had even spoken to him as a potential witness the day after Catalino's body was found, asking if he or his mother had seen or heard anything unusual. His name was Dyonathan Celestrino, and despite being only 16 years old, he was the serial killer they had been hunting. Born on January 5, 1992 in Rio Brilhante, Dyonathan was raised by his mother, who was a public school teacher, and his aunt. There doesn't appear to be any information on who his father was, or if Dyonathan himself even knew his identity. Although he grew up with little money, by all available accounts his upbringing didn't involve any obvious trauma, There were no records of abuse, no known violent incidents, and he had no criminal history. At school, his teachers described him as quiet and withdrawn, but not disruptive or problematic. He wasn't bullied or tormented by his peers, though he didn't have many friends either, choosing to keep mostly to himself. As a teenager, his interests began to stand out. He dressed entirely black, wore heavy makeup, and listened to metal music. In such a small religious community, he was seen as an outsider, but nobody believed him to be dangerous. That said, he did have a difficult personality and was viewed as being unpredictable. He was known to be moody and to snap at people over the tiniest of things, such as asking him a basic question. Eerily, one of his favourite things to do was to hang out in local cemeteries by himself, and even when the killings began, he continued going out late at night and aimlessly wandering through these graveyards. His mother didn't suspect a thing and never once asked where he was going. With no real friends, he spent hours locked in his bedroom, on the internet, particularly on Orkut, where he frequently posted in dark and disturbing communities about death, Satanism, and the occult. His mother wasn't allowed to enter his bedroom and had no idea what dark secrets he was hiding inside. But on October 9th, less than a week after Gleiss's body had been discovered, police arrived at his home with a search warrant. He was arrested and taken into custody without resistance, remaining completely silent when officers read him his rights. With Dyonathan out of the way, for the first time ever, his bedroom door was open to somebody other than himself. Inside, the officers were immediately struck by an imposing image on the wall, a large photograph of a man they all instantly knew and recognized, Francisco de Assis Pereira. Better known as the Park Maniac, Pereira was one of Brazil's most infamous serial killers, having assaulted and murdered at least 11 women in São Paulo in the late 1990s. His crimes were brutal, methodical, and carried out under the pretense of religious and moral authority. For most, he was a figure of horror, but in Dyonathan's bedroom, he was pinned up on the wall the way a teenager would typically place a poster of their favourite actor or musician. There were scribbled note pages everywhere, featuring satanic poetry and occult writings. One note even had a list of names, with either the word dead or saved written next to each of them. They located dozens of newspaper clippings about the Cross Maniac in the room, and they shockingly even found several knives, which still had traces of blood on them. And as if all of that wasn't damning enough, they found items stolen from the 3 victims scattered around the room, including jewellery that belonged to Leticia and the blouse Gleiss had been wearing when she was killed. There was now no question at all that this 16-year-old boy was the Cross Maniac. But what they didn't yet understand was why he had committed the murders and what the meaning of the symbolic crucifixion pose was to him. Once in custody, it didn't take long for Dyonathan to confess. He told the detectives that he did not believe in God, but that he did believe in Satan, which doesn't really make an awful lot of sense, as they're sort of a package deal. You could argue he was an atheistic Satanist, but that doesn't actually line up with his other statements either. He said that he forced his victims to go with him to isolated locations at knife point, where he would ask them a number of questions, deciding their fate based on the answers they gave him. If he deemed them to be impure in his eyes, he would kill them. But really, when it came down to it, his main explanation for why he killed all 3 of his victims was the same. He claimed they were all homosexual. This was true of Catalino and Leticia, though it's unclear if it was true of 13-year-old Gleiss. Supposedly, the crucifixion pose was to help their souls ascend into heaven, as if he was redeeming them somehow by murdering them and posing their bodies. Though if he didn't believe in God, I don't really understand how he could believe in heaven. With so much contradiction and confusion in his statements, it's difficult to make sense of what actually motivated his actions, especially given that he also confessed that he was obsessed with the Park Maniac and that one of his main goals had been to surpass his idol's body count. He told them he looked up to Pereira, that he'd studied his case and all of his murders, and in doing so he made it very clear that he hadn't acted impulsively. He had been careful, precise, methodical, and that's what made him even more dangerous, because this wasn't about rage, it was about control. He believed he was right, and worse, he believed he was necessary. In his eyes, his murders were moral and justified. He was punishing people who were impure. That same day, a press conference was held announcing the apprehension of the Cross Maniac. The revelation that a 16-year-old teenager was behind the murders shocked not just the residents of the city of Rio Brilhante, but the entire nation of Brazil. Despite the damning evidence, it just didn't seem believable to many of the locals, and so there was immediate speculation that Dyonathan had not acted alone. The belief that he had been leading a cult of satanic teenagers became widespread, so much so that the police had to formally declare that he had acted entirely alone. though this did little to stop the whispers of a murderous cult still lurking in the shadows, who were even more dangerous now their head had been severed. Psychiatric evaluations of Dyonathan determined that he was mentally competent, even though he displayed a number of disturbing traits. He was emotionally cold, unpredictable, and showed no signs of empathy or remorse. As a result, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and chronic psychopathy. One of the psychologists even claimed that his religious motive was completely made up, and that he actually killed because he enjoyed the sense of control and power he felt from making other people suffer. In their final report, the evaluators stated that Dyonathan presented a high risk of future violence and posed an ongoing danger to society. But because he was still a minor, Brazilian law significantly limited his potential punishment. No matter how horrific his crimes were, he could only be held until he was 21 under the Child and Adolescent Statute, which meant that he could only receive a 5-year sentence for the murders of 3 people. Although the authorities tried to have him institutionalized as a way to get around this limitation, every psychiatric hospital they spoke to refused to accept him as a patient. So he was sent to a juvenile correctional facility in Ponta Porã, nearly 200 kilometers from his hometown, to be held until he turned 21. There he kept mostly to himself, with staff finding him polite and respectful. They reported that he got good grades in his classes and even turned in some of the best assignments in his group. But in 2013, he turned 21. And as a result, his sentence was officially over, which meant legally there were no grounds to keep him detained, and he had to be released back into the world. But the deadline for his release came and passed and nothing changed, with authorities keeping Dyonathan behind bars. Despite his apparent good behavior throughout his time in prison, continuous psychiatric evaluations classified him as psychologically unstable, manipulative, and unrepentant. They all made it clear he continued to pose a threat to the public and was extremely likely to reoffend and even murder again if he was let free. Though no official new sentence was given to him, a judge decided that he posed too great a risk to be released, and as a result, he would remain behind bars. There was no set release date and no planned end to his incarceration, so in essence, he was going to remain in prison indefinitely. As you can probably imagine, Dyonathan wasn't too happy with this ruling. He believed he'd served his time and that legally he should be set free. So he took matters into his own hands. Although there were plans to move him to a more secure facility, Dyonathan was still being held in the Ponta Porã Juvenile Centre, and it was significantly lacking in security measures. Taking advantage of this, Dyonathan somehow got hold of a saw of some kind, though the details are a little unclear. He may have had it smuggled into the prison, or perhaps fashioned it out of materials he acquired somehow. He then used it to quietly cut through the metal bars over the window in his room, allowing him to slip through it and escape on March 3, 2013. No guards saw him go. There were no alarms, no chase. By the time anyone even noticed he was missing, he was already long gone. The next morning, the news that the Cross Maniac had escaped spread fast, with national media outlets running the story within hours, and the public being immediately put on alert. His images were plastered all over the news, with the public being asked to report any potential sightings of him. Tip lines were instantly flooded with calls, with people claiming to see him all around the country as mass panic overtook Brazil. There was still a genuine belief that Dyonathan was the leader of some sort of satanic cult, and that he was going to reunite with them now that he was out, and not only continue his murder spree, but escalate it to make up for lost time. A number of social media profiles appeared online, which claimed to be Dyonathan himself, featuring posts where he threatened to kill again, this time in different cities across the country. Although all these profiles were later found to be fake by the police, the impact they had on the public was very real. The detention center he escaped from wasn't far from the border of Paraguay, so Brazilian police reached out to their Paraguayan counterparts, telling them there was a high chance a dangerous serial killer had crossed the border into their country. And they were totally right, because on April 27th, almost 2 months since his escape, a Brazilian expat in the Paraguayan city of Horqueta informed the police that he had seen Dyonathan on the street, recognizing his face. Following up on his tip, Dyonathan was discovered to be living in a nearby boarding house. There, he had been leading a surprisingly low-key life, working at a car wash, learning to speak Spanish, and even dating a local woman. But inside his room, police allegedly found notebooks filled with disturbing drawings and chilling phrases such as, "All Catholics must die," and "Alive or dead, I'm a serial killer." There are even claims that his phone contained messages showing he'd been planning to meet up with a 14-year-old boy the week he was arrested, implying he had intended to murder him. Whether he killed anyone else during his 2 months of freedom is unknown. Though if he did, he clearly didn't pose them in the same crucifixion style he had become notorious for, otherwise I imagine it would have been all over the news. After his discovery, he was arrested and taken into custody by Paraguayan police, where he instantly confessed that he was the notorious Maniac of the Cross. They discovered that his room in the boarding house had been paid for by his mother and his aunt, and that they had regularly visited him there, meaning they had been knowingly aiding a violent fugitive. I would have thought that would be enough for them to be legally punished in some manner themselves, but I couldn't find anything claiming that was the case. Dyonathan even gave an interview on a local radio station after his arrest, where he claimed that he was actually a hitman and not a serial killer, despite the claim contradicting all the evidence and his own prior confessions. Regardless, 2 days after his arrest, on April 29th, he was extradited back to Brazil. The Cross Maniac was back in their custody, but the question of what exactly they were meant to do with him still remained unanswered. While authorities tried to figure out what to do with him, with more than 20 psychiatric facilities refusing to admit him as a patient, he was almost killed in custody when a police officer fired a shot at him in his cell, grazing his face. The officer later claimed his gun had fired by accident, but other witnesses claimed he had been threatening Dyonathan for days and had pointed his gun at him multiple times. Eventually, he was admitted to the psychiatric wing of the Campo Grande Penal Institution, a secure unit in a maximum security prison, where he could receive treatment for his mental illnesses. However, he didn't fade quietly back into the prison system. While he was previously seen as a model inmate, after being recaptured, his imprisonment was marked by repeated violence, erratic behaviour, and clashes with prison staff and other inmates. For example, in 2015, he attacked a prison guard with a sharpened broomstick, and the following year he tried to stab another staff member with a fork. In one of the most serious incidents, in September 2023, he assaulted a prison officer, punching him in the face and threatening to kill him, all because he didn't want to go back to his cell following his recreational time. Even when he was restricted to only having solitary yard time, he continued to cause trouble. In October, he threw a bottle of urine at a guard, something reports claim he had done multiple times, after once again being asked to return to his cell. As a result of all this, he is never left unsupervised in any situation, and is seen as a serious risk to those inside the prison, let alone the public outside. In 2024, Brazil's custodial hospitals were all ordered to be closed, meaning there would no longer be any form of psychiatric detention available in the country. These institutions were realistically the only places equipped to manage mentally ill offenders like Dyonathan. With their closures, he was moved out of psychiatric care and into a secure wing of the prison with the general population. Now in his mid-30s, Dyonathan remains behind bars, spending most of his time in isolation for the safety of the staff and the other inmates. And there are no signs that his mental illness, or his violent behaviour, have improved. Interestingly, his detention has never actually been legally defined. There has been no trial, no sentence, and there is no clear legal path forward. So while he could technically remain incarcerated until the day he dies, he could also technically be released at any point if a judge ordered him to be. And that's where the case sits today, with Dyonathan in a sort of legal limbo inside a locked cell in a maximum security prison, with no sentence and no end date, just a locked door, and the uneasy hope from the residents of Rio Brilhante that it stays shut. And with that, our exploration of Brazil's Cross Maniac killer comes to a close. As always, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and comment and all that sort of stuff that helps feed the appetite of the ever-hungry algorithm gods, so other people actually get a chance to watch the video, or the chance to ignore it. Either way, all that sort of stuff helps put it in front of people, so it gets the opportunity to live or die on its own 2 feet. As I said up front, a lot of the information about this case hasn't come from English language sources, so there's a high likelihood that some of the details will be wrong or mistranslated, but I've tried my best to be as accurate as possible with the information presented. If any of you happen to be Brazilian and know more about the case or want to correct anything I've said, then just let me know down below. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and checking out some of my other true crime content. If you want to support my channel further and to have your name at the end of my videos, I've got a membership option here on YouTube and a Patreon in the description too. Until next time, you have been watching The Mystery Abyss.